bell, subscribe to my YouTube channel for deeply emotional, romantic, and mature stories that echo through your heart. Don't forget to like, share, and comment to support meaningful storytelling. Sarah had lived in apartment 4B for 3 years, and in all that time, she had never spoken more than a polite good morning to the man in 4A. She knew his name was David from the mailboxes downstairs, and she knew he worked irregular hours because she sometimes heard his door close at odd times of the night. But that was the extent of their connection until the evening everything changed. It was a Thursday in October when the knock came. Sarah had been curled up on her couch, surrounded by tissues and the remnants of what should have been her wedding planning materials. The engagement ring she'd thrown across the room 3 days earlier still lay somewhere behind the bookshelf, and she hadn't had the strength to retrieve it. Her ex-fiancé now had left her for someone younger, someone who understood his ambitions better. The words still burned like acid in her chest. The knock was soft, almost hesitant. Sarah considered ignoring it, but something about the gentle rhythm made her pause. She dragged herself to the door and peered through the peephole. David stood there, holding something in his hands, his dark hair slightly disheveled as if he'd run his fingers through it nervously. She opened the door, suddenly aware of her tear-stained cheeks and the oversized sweater that had seen better days. "Hi," she managed, her voice hoarse from crying. David's warm brown eyes met hers, and she saw something there she hadn't expected, genuine concern mixed with an emotion she couldn't quite identify. "I'm sorry to bother you," he began, his voice deeper than she remembered from their brief hallway encounters. "I know we don't really know each other, but—" He held up a plate covered with aluminum foil. "I heard you crying through the walls the past few nights, and I thought maybe you could use some comfort food." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The simple kindness of the gesture, coming from someone who was essentially a stranger, threatened to unleash a fresh wave of tears. But what came next from David's lips would change everything she thought she knew about love, timing, and the courage to speak truth. "Actually," David continued, his voice growing quieter, more vulnerable, "that's not entirely true. I've been wanting to talk to you for months, Sarah. Every morning when I see you leaving for work, every evening when you come home looking tired but still smiling at Mrs. Chen from downstairs, I've been trying to work up the courage to say something, anything, but I never found the right moment, and then I heard you crying, and I realized that maybe there's never a perfect moment for the things that matter." Sarah stared at him, the plate of food forgotten between them. The hallway seemed to shrink around them, creating an intimate space where only truth could exist. "I know this might sound strange," David continued, his words coming faster now, as if he needed to say them before he lost his nerve, "but I think I've been falling in love with you from a distance, the way you always hold the elevator for people, even when you're clearly in a hurry, the way you water the plants in the lobby when the super forgets, the way you hum softly to yourself when you think no one's listening. I've been collecting these little moments, and I know I have no right to feel this way about someone I barely know, but stop." Sarah whispered, and David's face immediately fell, the hope in his eyes dimming. "Please just come in." David hesitated at the threshold, and Sarah realized how her apartment must look. Tissues scattered everywhere, wedding magazines torn and discarded, the general chaos of a life recently shattered. But something in his expression told her he wasn't judging her mess. He was seeing her pain and wanting to understand it. "I'm sorry," she said as she led him to the couch, moving aside the debris of her broken dreams. "I'm not exactly at my best right now." When is anyone ever at their best when their heart is breaking? David asked gently, setting the plate on her coffee table. "I brought lasagna, by the way, my grandmother's recipe. She always said food couldn't fix everything, but it could give you strength to fix yourself." Sarah looked at this man, really looked at him for the first time. She noticed the laugh lines around his eyes, the way his hands moved with careful precision, the small scar on his chin that she'd never seen from their polite distance. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she asked. "You don't even know what happened." David settled into the chair across from her, maintaining a respectful distance but close enough that she could see the sincerity in his face. "Because 3 months ago I went through my own version of hell," he said quietly. "My wife left me after 7 years of marriage. She said I was too quiet, too boring, that I didn't dream big enough for her. She moved in with her personal trainer 2 weeks later. The revelation hung between them like a bridge Sarah hadn't expected to find. "I'm sorry," she said, meaning it deeply. "The point is," David continued, "I know what it sounds like when someone's world falls apart. And I know what it feels like to question everything you thought you knew about yourself and about love. So when I heard you crying, it wasn't just sympathy I felt, it was recognition." Sarah pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. "My fiancé left me for his assistant. 23 years old, fresh out of college, full of potential he said I'd lost." The words came out bitter, but saying them to David somehow made them feel less toxic. "His loss," David said simply, and the quiet conviction in his voice made Sarah's heart skip. "You don't know me well enough to say that," she replied, though she found herself hoping he'd argue the point. "You're right," David acknowledged. "I don't know your favorite color, or what you studied in college, or whether you prefer coffee or tea in the morning. But I know you're the kind of person who apologizes to the delivery guy when he has to climb 4 flights of stairs. I know you leave your porch light on during thunderstorms because you noticed Mrs. Chen is afraid of the dark. I know you sing along to jazz music while you cook. And you have a beautiful voice even when you think no one can hear it." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "You've been paying very close attention, guilty as charged," David said with a small smile that transformed his entire face. "I've been a terrible neighbor, actually. Instead of introducing myself like a normal person, I've been secretly admiring you from afar like some character in a romantic novel." Despite everything, Sarah found herself almost smiling. "That's either very sweet or slightly stalkerish." "I was hoping for sweet," David admitted. "But I understand if it's too much, especially right now. I didn't come here to add pressure to your life. I just wanted you to know that someone sees you, really sees you, and thinks you're extraordinary." The words settled into Sarah's chest like warm honey, soothing places she didn't even realize were raw. When was the last time someone had called her extraordinary? When was the last time someone had noticed the small kindnesses she offered the world? "Why now?" she asked. "Why tell me this when I'm at my lowest point?" David was quiet for a long moment, considering his words. "Because maybe that's when we need to hear it most, and because I've learned that life doesn't wait for perfect timing. If I'd worked up the courage to talk to you 6 months ago, maybe we could have been friends. Maybe you would have had someone to talk to before things got so bad with your fiancé. Maybe I wouldn't have spent so many nights wondering what your laugh sounded like up close." Sarah felt tears threatening again, but these were different from the bitter tears she'd been shedding for days. These felt cleaner somehow, like rain after a long drought. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "I don't know how to trust my judgment about people anymore. I thought I knew him, David. I thought we were building something real, and it turns out I was living in a fantasy." "Then don't trust your judgment right now," David said gently. "Trust mine. I think you're brave and kind and stronger than you know. I think you deserve someone who sees all the beautiful things about you that you can't see yourself right now. And I think that someday, when you're ready, you're going to love someone so completely that all this pain will feel like necessary preparation. And what if that someone is you?" The question escaped before Sarah could stop it, hanging in the air between them like a challenge. David's intake of breath was audible. "Then I would consider myself the luckiest man alive," he said quietly. "But I'm not here to be your rebound, Sarah. I'm not here to take advantage of your vulnerability. I'm here because I couldn't stand the thought of you being alone with all that pain when I was right next door, wanting nothing more than to help carry some of it." Sarah studied his face, searching for signs of deception or hidden agenda, but found only honest concern and something deeper that made her pulse quicken. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we eat my grandmother's lasagna before it gets cold," David said, reaching for the plate. "And maybe you tell me about your day, or your job, or what kind of music makes you happy. We start at the beginning, like we should have months ago." As David uncovered the plate, the smell of herbs and cheese filled the apartment, mixing with the lingering scent of his cologne, something warm and woodsy that made Sarah want to move closer. "It smells incredible," she said, realizing she hadn't eaten a real meal in days. "She was an amazing cook," David said, his voice carrying a note of loss. "She passed away last year, but she made sure I learned all her recipes first," said a man who could feed people would never be truly alone. "Smart woman," Sarah said, accepting the fork he offered her. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and she felt a jolt of electricity that had nothing to do with static and everything to do with the way he was looking at her. As they shared the meal, their conversation flowed with surprising ease. David told her about his work as a graphic designer, his love of old movies, and his secret dream of writing a novel someday. Sarah found herself talking about her job at the marketing firm, her complicated relationship with her mother, and the way she'd always wanted to travel to Ireland, but had never found anyone willing to go with her. "I've been to Ireland," David said, his eyes lighting up. 3 years ago, right after my divorce was finalized, I needed to get away from everything familiar, so I just bought a ticket and went. Most beautiful country I've ever seen. Was it healing?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious. "It was lonely," David said honestly. "But it was also the first time in years I did something just because I wanted to, not because someone else expected it of me. There's something powerful about discovering you can be alone without being lonely, if that makes sense." It made perfect sense to Sarah, who had spent the past 3 days feeling more alone in her relationship's aftermath than she had in years of actual solitude. "I think I need to learn that lesson," she admitted. "You will," David said with quiet confidence, "but you don't have to learn it alone." As the evening wore on, Sarah found herself noticing things about David she'd missed during their brief hallway encounters. The way he listened with his whole body, leaning slightly forward when she spoke as if her words were precious. The way he laughed, not loud or boisterous, but warm and genuine, like sunlight breaking through clouds. The way he looked at her, not with pity for her circumstances, but with curiosity about her thoughts and dreams. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah said as they finished the last of the lasagna. "Anything." "When you said you'd been falling in love with me from a distance, did you mean that, or were you just being kind?" David set down his fork and met her eyes directly. "I meant every word. I know it sounds impossible. How can you love someone you've never really talked to? But I think sometimes the heart recognizes something before the mind catches up. Every time I saw you, I felt this pull, like I was supposed to know you, supposed to be part of your story somehow." Sarah's breath caught. "That's either the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me, or you're very good at this." "I'm terrible at this," David said with a self-deprecating smile. "I'm the guy who practices conversations in the shower and still manages to put his foot in his mouth, but with you the words just come like they've been waiting." Sarah stood up abruptly, needing movement to process the intensity of what was happening between them. She walked to her window, looking out at the city lights, very aware of David's presence behind her. "I'm scared," she admitted without turning around. "Of what?" His voice was closer now, and she could feel his warmth at her back. "Of making the same mistake again, of trusting someone who will leave when things get complicated, of being vulnerable with someone who might decide I'm not worth the effort." David's reflection appeared in the window beside hers, his expression serious. "I can't promise I'll never hurt you," he said quietly. "I can't promise I'm perfect or that love is ever simple, but I can promise that if you give me a chance, really give me a chance, I will show up every day for whatever comes. I will choose you Again and again, not because it's easy, but because you're worth choosing. Sarah turned to face him, surprised by how close he was, how she could see flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "How do you know," she whispered, "how do you know I'm worth it when you barely know me?" David raised his hand slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Because in 3 years of living next door to you, I've never once seen you be unkind. Because you cry quietly so you won't disturb your neighbors even when your heart is breaking. Because when you smile at people, really smile, they light up like they've been given a gift. Because you're standing here, terrified and beautiful and brave enough to keep asking the hard questions even when the answers might hurt." Sarah felt herself leaning into his touch, her body responding to his nearness in ways her mind wasn't ready to analyze. "David, I know it's too much too fast," he said, his thumb tracing her cheekbones so gently she might have imagined it. "I know you need time to heal, to figure out who you are outside of that relationship. I'm not asking you to jump into anything. I'm just asking you to let me be here while you do." "What does that mean, exactly?" Sarah asked, though she already knew she wanted whatever he was offering. "It means I'd like to have dinner with you again tomorrow night, and maybe the night after that. It means I'd like to learn your favorite color and what makes you laugh and whether you really prefer jazz to everything else. It means I'd like to be the person you call when you have good news, and the person you let hold you when the grief gets too heavy to carry alone." Sarah searched his face, looking for signs of doubt or reservation, but found only steady certainty and something that looked remarkably like hope. "And what if I'm not ready for that kind of connection for a while? What if I need to be friends first, to take things slowly? Then we go slowly," David said simply. "Sarah, I've been waiting 3 years just to have a real conversation with you. I'm not going anywhere." The simple declaration broke something open in Sarah's chest, some tightly wound coil of fear and self-protection that had been keeping her heart locked away. Before she could guess herself, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around David's waist, burying her face against his chest. He held her carefully as if she were made of spun glass, one hand stroking her hair while the other pressed gently against her back. He smelled like soap and something uniquely him, and Sarah found herself thinking that this was what safety felt like, not the absence of risk, but the presence of someone willing to face whatever came together. "Thank you," she whispered against his shirt. "For what?" "For seeing me, for caring enough to knock on my door, for making me remember that there are still good people in the world." David's arms tightened around her slightly. "Thank you for opening it," he said, "and for trusting me with your story." They held each other in the growing darkness of her living room, city lights painting patterns on the walls around them, and Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. Not the desperate hope of someone trying to fix what was broken, but the quiet hope of someone ready to build something new. When they finally pulled apart, David's hands lingered on her shoulders. "I should probably go," he said reluctantly. "It's getting late, and I don't want to overwhelm you. Will I see you tomorrow?" Sarah asked, surprised by how much she wanted the answer to be yes. "If you want to," David said. "I make a pretty decent chicken parmesan." Sarah smiled, the first real smile she'd managed in days. "I'd like that, but David, next time, let's start with dessert. I have a feeling we're going to need the sugar for energy." David's laugh was rich and warm, filling the spaces in Sarah's heart she'd forgotten were empty. "Deal," he said. "But I should warn you, my chocolate chip cookies are dangerously good. You might fall in love with them." "Just the cookies?" Sarah asked, feeling bold in a way that surprised her. David's smile was soft and full of promise. "We'll see," he said. "We have all the time in the world to find out." As Sarah watched him walk to the door, she realized that for the first time in months, she was looking forward to tomorrow. Not because her problems had disappeared or her heartbreak had magically healed, but because someone had seen her at her worst and chosen to stay. Someone had knocked on her door with kindness and left with pieces of her story, promising to handle them with care. "David," she called as he reached for the doorknob. He turned back, eyebrows raised in question. Your grandmother was right. About the food, I mean. It didn't fix everything, but it gave me strength I didn't know I needed. She'd be happy to hear that, David said. Sleep well, Sarah, and remember, I'm right next door if you need anything. After he left, Sarah stood in her doorway for a long moment, listening to the sound of his key in the lock, the soft close of his door. Then she went back inside and began cleaning up the remnants of her old life, making space for whatever came next. Outside her window, the city hummed with the stories of 8 million people, each carrying their own hopes and heartbreaks, their own moments of unexpected grace. And in apartment 4B, Sarah fell asleep thinking about chocolate chip cookies and the man next door who had seen her tears and offered comfort instead of answers, presents instead of promises, and the radical gift of being known. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own moments of doubt and discovery. But tonight, for the first time in months, Sarah's dreams were filled with possibility instead of regret, with laughter instead of tears, and with the quiet certainty that sometimes the best thing in life come disguised as ordinary Tuesday evenings when your neighbor knocks on your door with lasagna and changes everything you thought you knew about love.